It was just another Tuesday morning on the outskirts of Maplewood. The sun peeked over the horizon, bathing the streets in a soft glow. The hum of early commuters filled the air as people hurried off to work, coffee in hand, ready to take on the day. Officer Daniel Grant was parked at the corner of 5th and Pine, a spot he knew well. He called it his routine zone, a place where he claimed to keep the streets safe. For years, this had been his beat, calm, predictable, and uneventful. But today was different. At 7:18 a.m., a black sedan rolled through the intersection. Its brake lights flashed briefly, but it didn't come to a complete stop. Officer Grant didn't hesitate. He pulled out onto the street, lights flashing, siren wailing. Another traffic stop, or so he thought. The driver complied immediately, pulling over just a few yards down the road. Inside the car was Dr. Isaac Carter, a well-respected surgeon at Maplewood General Hospital. He was on his way to perform an emergency operation, a routine day for a man dedicated to saving lives. But for Officer Grant, Isaac wasn't a surgeon. He wasn't a father, a husband, or a neighbor. In that moment, he was a suspect. Grant approached the vehicle with measured steps, his hand resting on the grip of his service weapon. He tapped on the window, his voice sharp, demanding identification before explaining the reason for the stop. Dr. Carter handed over his license and registration, his hands moving deliberately, cautiously. Years of experience had taught him the unspoken rules of these encounters. Hands visible, polite tone, no sudden movements. He asked calmly, "Officer, may I know why I was stopped?" But his voice seemed to go unheard. Grant's eyes scanned the car's interior, landing on the medical ID badge clipped to the dashboard. Instead of diffusing the situation, his suspicion deepened. "Step out of the car," he said firmly. Dr. Carter hesitated, confusion flashing across his face. He asked again, "What's this about?" But Grant's command grew sharper. "Step out. Now." A small crowd began to gather, some pulling out their phones. Dr. Carter raised his hands slightly, stepping out onto the pavement as instructed. The tension in the air was undeniable. What happened next was recorded by multiple witnesses. Their videos would soon flood social media, sparking outrage and questions that demanded answers. Without explanation, Grant moved to restrain Dr. Carter, forcing his hands behind his back. "You're being detained for resisting," the officer claimed. But the video told a different story. A man compliant, calm, and utterly bewildered. Dr. Carter didn't shout. He didn't resist. He simply asked, "Is this really necessary?" His voice steady, even as his heart raced. In those moments, a routine traffic stop turned into something far greater, a confrontation that would ripple far beyond that quiet suburban street. The arrest would soon ignite a firestorm of public outcry, forcing the Maplewood Police Department into the national spotlight. But for Dr. Carter, it was just the beginning of a fight for justice he hadn't asked for. The hours that followed his arrest were a blur: paperwork, questions, and the cold, sterile walls of a holding cell. For the first time in his life, Isaac Carter, a man who had saved countless lives, found himself behind bars. The news traveled fast. By the time he was released later that afternoon, his face and name were already trending. Local news stations aired the footage, framing it as a routine arrest. But on social media, the narrative was different. Witnesses had uploaded videos showing a calm, compliant man being treated like a criminal. Hashtags like #JusticeForCarter and #profiling in Maplewood exploded, sparking heated debates online. Dr. Carter returned home to his family that evening, but peace was elusive. His wife, Elena, met him at the door, her face a mix of relief and anguish. Their young daughter clung to his leg, too young to understand but sensing the tension in the air. Isaac sat at the dining table, replaying the events in his mind. He had always been cautious, mindful of the unspoken rules. Yet still, he was here. His phone buzzed incessantly, texts, calls, emails. Friends and colleagues reached out, offering support. But one message stood out: a video link sent by his hospital administrator. Attached was a simple note: "You need to see this." He pressed play. The video, recorded by a bystander, showed the entire encounter, from the moment Officer Grant approached his car to the instant the cuffs were snapped on his wrists. It was all there. The captions called it for what it was: racial profiling. By morning, the video had gone viral, shared by influencers, activists, and even celebrities. It wasn't just Maplewood talking anymore. The nation was watching. Meanwhile, within the Maplewood Police Department, the atmosphere was tense. The video had reached the desk of Chief Angela Morris, who knew this wasn't something they could sweep under the rug. The department issued a standard statement: "We are aware of the incident and are conducting a full review." But the community wanted more than words. Protests began forming outside the station, peaceful but resolute. Families held signs that read, "Doctors save lives, not break laws," and "Stop profiling our neighbors." Reporters swarmed the area, demanding answers. Inside, Officer Grant faced growing scrutiny from his peers. Some defended him, calling the backlash unfair. Others stayed silent, uneasy with what they'd seen. For Dr. Carter, the public support was overwhelming but also heavy in its weight. This wasn't just about him anymore. He was being asked to represent a struggle he had spent years trying to navigate quietly. But this time, there was no escaping the spotlight. 2 days later, Isaac stood at a press conference, surrounded by his family and legal team. Cameras flashed as he adjusted the microphone, his voice steady but firm. "I shouldn't have to defend my humanity," he began. "No one should." His words echoed across newsrooms and social media feeds, a rallying cry for change. The fallout wasn't limited to words. Activists demanded action, calling for an independent investigation into Officer Grant's record. Anonymous sources leaked details about prior complaints, incidents of similar stops targeting minorities, swept under the rug with little consequence. As the pressure mounted, the mayor of Maplewood announced a town hall meeting to address the community's concerns. The room was packed, standing room only, as residents lined up to speak. Many shared personal stories of discrimination, their voices cracking with emotion. The mayor promised reforms, but the crowd was skeptical. They wanted action, not empty promises. Back at home, Dr. Carter found himself balancing his professional responsibilities with an entirely new role as a symbol of resistance. Patients hugged him during appointments, whispering words of encouragement. Strangers stopped him on the street, thanking him for standing up. But at night, when the cameras were off, the weight of it all bore down on him. For Officer Grant, the days that followed were equally heavy. The videos played on repeat in his mind, but not as he remembered the incident. For the first time, he began to question his own actions. Had he acted out of fear, bias, or was it something he had refused to confront within himself? Their lives, so different in every way, were now entwined by a single moment, a moment that had sparked outrage, reflection, and a community's demand for change. As the protests continued and the investigations deepened, one thing became clear: this was far from over.